Hello guys, I wanted to log on a little bit early because we are going to get started in just a moment. And I am super excited about this discussion, and I hope you guys are as well. I wanted to make sure my technology was working well because I have had technology issues in the past. I hope you all will join me. Let's see. I hope everyone will join me. I am sending out invites, trying to get everyone on. Hope you guys will join. I think the information is going to be great. May be helpful for some, may not be, but hopefully we get the conversation started talking about suicide and self-injury. And I think we have a great speaker today, so I hope you guys will just join me or share with someone you know. Hey, G, I'm so glad you're here. I'm trying to play with this technology because, you know, Facebook has enhanced itself so much since I have been on here. It has enhanced so much. So I see people have joined me. Hold on. Okay. Hey, Sharon. So we're talking about suicide and self-injury. And because I'm new to this Facebook Live thing, I haven't done many of them. I wanted to make sure, well, I can do the live part, but bringing somebody else on, I don't know. So I decided to get on here early and try to set this up just so we can talk about suicide and self-injury in honor of minority mental health awareness, because many minorities do not go and get any type of mental health intervention. And so hopefully this discussion will demystify some of the myths and stigmas associated with minority mental health, especially mental health in the Black community. And we'll have Laurie Craigen joining us soon. And I'm just going to invite some more people. If you guys want to, you want to share on your page, I'm going to give out a free gift that I'll mail to you all. If you want to share this on your page, enter to win a free gift. Let's see. I'm just inviting people while we wait. I have a few more minutes. We're going to start at 6:30. And I'm sorry, I'm just a little bit quiet, but I'm letting people know that we're on here. If you all want to share the link. So I'm assuming everyone can see me just fine. When I first started doing this Facebook Live thing, I didn't know that you have to be on a mobile device to be able to do Facebook Live. You can't do it from a laptop. So I learned something new when working with this. So we have about 2 more minutes and we'll get started. Maybe give some people just a few more minutes to join us. I know it's a Monday. Mondays are typically crazy for many people. I know it's crazy for me. Pretty much crazy madness Monday. Very busy day, but we're going to get started in just a moment. Yeah, in just another moment. Have 1 more minute before we get started. All right. But thank you guys for joining. Okay, I think I did that right. I invited folks, and I'm gonna introduce myself until Dr. Craigen joins us and give you guys just a little bit of insight about me. I just want to make sure she is not having any issues with joining. Because, we practiced this earlier today, but technology seems to want to act up right when we try to get things started. So thank you for joining. I am Dr. Key, so everyone calls me, and I am an expert in global health and human services. And basically that means I work a lot with vulnerable populations. I am trained in recognizing and responding to suicide. I'm also trained in conducting psychological suicide autopsies. And what that is going back into a person who has died by suicide history to get an understanding of how, why, when, and if it could have been prevented. And it usually gives family members some closure, helps them to understand what happened, what was going on, because suicide is a surprise. It's not something that people really know is going to happen until it happens. And families usually need some type of closure. And so this type of procedure allows them to get an understanding of what was going on in their loved one's life at the time of suicide. The person that we're going to have join us today is Dr. Laurie Craigen. And Dr. Craigen is really awesome, but she is a professor and a counselor, but she specializes in working with adolescents and self-injury. Her research is focused on self-injury, and I am about to bring her on because she has a lot of insight. Now, we did this early, so hopefully it worked. It said no answer. I'm going to try it again. Hold on. I am approving you, Dr. Craigen, but it's taking a minute. But she has a lot of research insight. Hi.
Hey, sorry, a couple snafus, but it worked.
It worked. It worked. It did give me a crazy warning message or something. But I'm so happy you joined me. I was just introducing you and myself. You might want to. I just told them your name basically, but and that you were basically an expert in self-injury. But if you could maybe just tell them a little bit about, I know you do research and you counsel adolescents and a lot of stuff that I know about, but they don't know.
Sure. Yeah. So I was hearing your little intro. I just when I popped on, and you're quite accurate. I'm a professor at Boston University School of Medicine. 2 years ago, Dr. Key was my colleague, still is, but my coworker at Old Dominion University. But I started to get interested in this topic of self-injury way back in my graduate degree program. Mm-hmm. I was a young woman who was cutting herself. I was a new clinician, an intern at the time, and was really just blown away by the amount of pain that she was in. And I realized I didn't know anything about what was going on. Mm-hmm. I had a background in self-injury. So I left that session, went home and got resources and just started reading. At that point forward, it's became really one of my main missions is to work with clients who self-injure. I've also done some research about the counseling experiences of young women who self-injure, and about the things that they're satisfied or not satisfied in treatment for. And in Virginia, I was really the one of the main go-to people for young women and men who self-injured, and I continued to do that work here in Boston as well.
Yes, you are so awesome with that. You're just a people person anyway.
Thank
So
you.
I want to give our audience just a little bit of, and if this allows me to do so, I want to give them just a little bit of the facts about what we're talking about here. So girls make attempts at suicide twice as often as boys. Girls attempt suicide that requires medical attention more than boys as well. Black adolescent suicide, I don't know if you heard that, is at a rate where it has basically doubled the rate of their white counterparts. And so we're talking about black children. Um,
Mm-hmm.
as well as girls are 3 times more likely to self-harm than boys, and that black girls are more likely to self-harm than their white counterparts. And I know you work with diverse populations. And then in
Absolutely.
low income communities, there's a prevalence. So can you tell us, and I can speak about suicide, but maybe you can tell us like how does how do children get to the point where the pain is so intense that they do self-harm? I mean, some examples that you're familiar with.
Right. Yeah. Good question. And I think that's a great way of saying it, how the pain is so
Yeah.
intense, right? So, um, I think it's a really good question. It has a lot of different answers. I'll try to make it succinct, but I use an example oftentimes is like, think of yourself walking on a beach, right? And it's cold, really cold day. You're on the beach and you see someone drowning in the water, right?
Mhm.
You don't stop. You don't stop. Oh my gosh, the water is right.
Right.
You jump in that water to try to save that person. And the reason you're not able to feel that pain is because the emotion is so strong, right? And that's often the same type of experience that someone who self-injures has. Is can you imagine a pain, an emotional pain so big that in order to feel something at all, you may need to hurt yourself physically, right?
Mm-hmm.
That sort of one example. Another reason, how does it get to that point, is a lot of the young people that I've worked with are very smart intellectually, very, very smart, but somewhere along the line, they, for whatever reason, it could be a myriad of different reasons, they didn't develop a language of expressing their emotions.
Right.
The way that they express their pain is through their physical wounds. Many children or adults may do so in order to get validation for their emotional pain. We live in a culture where sometimes our emotional pain is not validated in the same way that
Right.
physical pain is,
Right.
illness is, right? And so, in order to get that validation, in order to seek help, I've had people start self-injuring initially to get the help that they need.
Mm-hmm.
Other people, how does it get to that point? Maybe as a form of self-punishment, maybe as a point to feel nothing at all, maybe a point to feel something. But one of the clients that I work with said the most powerful thing to me, and she said that some people cry, I cut myself.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
So it's kind of an
It's
outlet, right?
definitely, and it's of course not a socially acceptable outlet, but it's an outlet nonetheless. And for many people, self-injury is a mechanism that keeps them alive. In other
Keeps them from
instances,
getting to the point of suicide.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
In other cases, acts of self-injury make someone, research says sometimes up to 85% more likely to eventually um, die by suicide.
Yes, die by suicide.
Right? You often hear things like, oh, it's just self-injury. Not necessarily. There's such a gray area between self-injury and suicide, and every case is different.
And that intervention is key too. What I know about my community, the Black community, is that we have to sort of demystify the counseling aspect or the intervention aspect of it, because in our community, there's so much stigma tied to mental health. And so a
Right.
lot of times people will, I have seen in my experiences, they're more comfortable sending their children to a life coach than they are with getting that other intervention that will be that a person like you who knows about what they're dealing with.
Right.
And so what I see is that we have to demystify the counseling aspect as far as being able to tell them what is counseling like for that person? What is the things that counselors would do or psychologists would do with their child behind those closed doors? Sort of making it transparent to them so that they're comfortable with getting some type of intervention, if that makes sense. Because they're not getting the intervention, but the issue still exists.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And I think, I think the hardest part is getting someone in the door.
Yes.
Get someone in the door and you keep the lines of communication open with the family, to learn that, all right, you're here. It doesn't mean that your child is crazy.
Right.
It doesn't mean you've done anything wrong as a parent. Well, there's some association with self-injury and neglect or abuse. It's not always the case. And so people are sometimes fearful, especially in marginalized populations, that someone's going to tell them that what they're doing is not. Yeah, and that's not, I think when people learn that what my role is and your role is to help get to the root of that pain.
Yes.
The self is just a symptom, and I'm not going to pathologize it all the time. I'm not going to focus so much on the symptom. I'm going to focus on what's driving the symptom.
Right, getting to the root of the problem and having an understanding of what's going on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the warning signs. And the warning signs that I talk about is really, I think these warning signs are more geared towards like suicidal ideation, but it's such a fine line between the two, that maybe you can add to this list and give some feedback. But I tell people a lot about hopelessness, and we can use terms like hopelessness to parents, and they're like, well, what do you mean? And it means like you have a kid who seems like there's no use in doing anything because there's going to be no change for them, that they have lost all hope in planning for the future or in doing things with friends or doing tasks because nothing for them is going to change. Meaning that their pain is still going to exist at that same level, so they don't want to do it. And is that the same with self-injury as far as one of the warning signs, maybe?
It can be. It can be, or the actual act of self-injury could be like an attempt to feel some sort of hope. Like if I feel something, maybe I'm alive. Or if I can show someone I'm in pain, maybe it will legitimize what I'm going through. So it could be of I'm trying to think of the word of like fueling that hope. Yeah. But it could also be what you said.
But a lot of people with the self-injury, they hide it. And most parents don't know that it's even happening to way later, and then they don't know what does that mean. Like, why are you doing this? Or and so because they can't process it, because it's something that's so new to them or even new to their family environment, they typically don't deal with it.
Right. And education is such an important piece because it's such an important piece.
Which is one of the things I advocate for. We actually train the parents and advocate to educate the parents on what's going on within our community. I think that we can see more change, but not knowing is really, I think, leading to these numbers or increased numbers and people dying by suicide. And so this feeling of being trapped, right? That is really intense. Trapped is just, there's no way out completely in this world, right? And I think about that idea of being trapped because I remember being in a relationship where I felt trapped in that relationship. I didn't feel free to be me. And so I think of trapped in terms of that. Can you add to?
Yeah. So can you imagine that feeling, right, of feeling trapped in their emotion, whether it be rage or anger or sadness or regret, that's so big, right? And so maybe if that feeling's so big, if I can just cut myself and have this to focus on, maybe I can get out of that feeling for a moment. And so I'd rather I'm speaking from the mind of someone who self-injures.
Right.
I'd rather feel this cut on my arm, if I do feel it, than this pain in my body and my mind and my soul. And so it's much more manageable. So the word trapped is a great way to describing people's attempt to get out of that feeling through self-injuring. And the tricky part about it is that it works. Like it gets them out of that intense emotion for a moment. And it can be that's why therapy is so important, because somebody who's not trained to work with this, it's very complex. And so how do you don't do that when it actually helps them?
Right.
And they're right.
Right. I agree. Another thing is the drastic change in behavior. Now, when we think about suicidal ideation, that drastic change in behavior could be sort of like those depression symptoms. They used to partake in certain activities. Now they don't want to do it anymore. But I would think with self-injury, that drastic change in behavior is really that aspect of cutting. But could it go with like the symptoms of depression and things as well?
Oh, yeah, exactly that. And also increased isolation. Many who self-injure don't flaunt their wounds; they hide them. And so maybe in the summertime they're wearing long sleeve shirts. They don't want to go to the beach anymore. They're not partaking in the things that they used to enjoy doing. They're isolating. Yeah, so it's similar in that ways as well.
And tell me this: in your sessions with adolescents, do you do things that sort of take their mind? Like, how do you establish rapport? How do you get them to talk about their pain? Do you just jump right in there, or do you like play? I know you play games and stuff, but I want you to tell everyone else that you do.
I jump right in there. I want the client to know that I see them for more than their self-injury, right? Like, they're not their self-injury. Actually, it's quite dangerous when someone comes in as an adolescent and says, I'm a cutter, right?
Right.
Well,
Right. I'm sorry, I'm getting all these.
Oh, that's okay. You're not a cutter. You are, Narkita. And I'm about Narkita. And so I do a lot of rapport building to get to know the client. And, without education, parents may say, what the heck are you doing with my child? You're just sitting in them. And it's really an intentional process where I spend time getting to know the client before I dive in. It's so important.
Right.
To know the
Right. That rapport building is so big because I would think that kids wouldn't even tell you anything without establishing a rapport. But have you, and I've heard parents say, well, I don't want to pay for someone to just play games with my child. We have real issues. And I can see that in the Black community. They're not going to pay unless you explain to them how is this going to benefit their child,
Yeah, that's a great. I've actually had parents of clients tell me that exact thing. When I first started out, I didn't have a good response, so I lost some clients. Which is unfortunate. And I was newer and greener to the field. Over the years, I developed a language and to be able to talk to them about the importance of rapport building and what that actually means and what that does in the therapeutic context.
Right.
I didn't have that language, and so I'd say in the beginning I wasn't very effective.
Yeah.
Because it's rapport building with the client, but it's also rapport building
with the parent.
Yeah,
because in this case, the parent makes the decision on whether or not the client even gets that intervention or that treatment, right?
Oh, yeah.
So one of the other things, and we talked a little bit about, drastic change in behavior, depression, but also, drugs and alcohol are big with that suicide ideation.
Yeah.
Do you see the same with self-injury?
Yeah, there can be a high correlation with substance abuse. Self-injury is never a behavior in isolation. There's usually something else going along with it. So sometimes that is substance abuse, but not all the time. Not all the time. Because when you look at substance abuse, it can actually also be considered under the self-injury umbrella. And so when I look at self-injury, the main thing that comes into my head is cutting, right? Self-injury, self-cutting. But you could also make the argument that piercings, eating disorders, substance abuse, self-destructive behaviors, high-risk behaviors, sexually acting out, those are all things that could be considered.
And we call that risky behavior. So any type of risky behavior could be associated with. Now we have a question from one of the people in the audience that talked about very young children. And I'm assuming very young children's Head Start age children. They're seeing an increase in them obsessively scratching themselves, banging head, that type of thing. And Do you even see that young? I know you see
Yeah,
adolescents.
mainly adolescents. I have worked with some children, and the research shows that there's an increase in um, the numbers of children that are self-injuring, starting as early as uh, first, second, third grade. The research is showing an increase in that population.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, it can be like a trauma response, or
Yes.
a, um, very similar to adolescent self-injuring, but there's also a high correlation with that type of behavior with autism, other developmental disabilities,
Mm-hmm.
sensory integration disorders, those sorts of diagnoses, as well as early types of obsessive compulsive behaviors. So
Mm-hmm.
it can be under the same umbrella of the type of self-injury I'm talking about, but it could also be a symptom of some other types of mental health disorders.
Mm-hmm. Because I wonder what they say that this is prevalent in lower income populations. So I wonder if it's like PTSD and adverse childhood experiences and all of that stuff being manifest really young. Because I
Yeah.
know from working with youth in foster care that they can exhibit some of the sexual behaviors very, very young if they were exposed to it.
Yeah. So it can really mimic that
Mm-hmm.
same experience,
Mm-hmm.
self-injury. Mm-hmm.
So can you talk a little bit? I mean, I know I've talked a little bit about the Black community, but I know you work with all populations. So can you speak just a little bit to like some of the diversity types of things that um maybe you do to kind of work with other cultures?
Yeah, sure. So I've worked with people from all different backgrounds. One of the things that is really important to me in my work is just to broach issues of difference right from the get-go. As a client works with me, if I'm working with someone that looks different than me, that I'm not afraid to bring up that difference with the client.
Mm-hmm.
May say, how does it feel for you as a Black woman working with a white therapist?
Mm-hmm.
In 9 times out of 10, in my experiences, the client will say, "Oh, it's fine." But you know what it does is it creates a door, an open door for issues of race and
Yeah.
difference and culture to be discussed, welcomed
Mm-hmm.
in the room. And so I think it's really important to do from the get-go. I never assume an expert stance on someone else's culture.
Right.
I like that I'm curious in terms of if I don't know something, that I ask about it, um, and that I don't like race culture to be like the elephant in the room.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that I like to talk about right from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Self-injury over the years is, for the most part, been studied most often in white middle
I
class populations.
oh
Yeah,
oh
and so a lot of the data is skewed. And so we have to be really cautious with the data, even some really strong data about gender differences in self-injury or types of self-injury or the characteristics of clients who self-injure, because that's only a small window into what we're looking at. And so I think newer research is going in that direction to look at the phenomenon of self-injury across different race,
right.
in different cultures and ethnicities. And so I think we're going to make some progress in that area.
Yeah, I think it's important because to me this has become a big epidemic. Like I traveled to Jamaica because I was requested to do a training on recognizing and responding to suicide. And I started to do research in Jamaica because you never want to go to another country and talk about something and you don't know that country. And I started to look, and the suicide rate there is so low as far as what they report, as far as what the CDC is reporting and things like that is very low. But what I found out is that there is a rise of suicide amongst adolescents. So it's as if this issue is just sneaking up on people and they're not prepared for it. It's becoming a bigger issue. And their concern is they don't know how to address it or how to use the resources that are available, and it's not a lot of resources available to address this issue. And I sort of feel like in the Black community as a whole, this self-injury and I'm just gonna say what people would say, like, oh, that's a white person's thing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the truth that they would say something like that, because the research, everything that was done on it was done where? In the white community. But it is
Mhm.
an epidemic in the black community, and it has
Oh,
to
yeah.
be addressed, and we have to begin to talk about it, because we're talking about children taking their lives before they even have a life. They haven't even
Mhm.
paid a bill yet, or had any kind of major life threatening. Um, they may have had some childhood things, but they haven't become adult yet, and they're taking their lives before they become adult, because they may have started cutting and led to more and led to more over the years, or they may have, in some cases, multiple attempts at suicide, and in other cases no attempt, just suicide, right?
Right.
And so, as I think, as a not just I think across cultures, that we need to take this seriously and not just say that it's something of that culture, of another culture, because it can sneak up on that culture at any time. I think this is an adolescent issue that's global, and
Yeah.
it's not about color or any of those things. It's just something that needs to be addressed. And I think that education is so important. But I always see the trainings for medical professionals, professors, gatekeepers, counselors. We can get training all the time, but where is the training for the parents? They are really the first responders, because they're in the house.
Mhm.
The interventions and things like that cannot happen if the parents don't have the information. and
Right.
and some of them are so ashamed of what's happening, that and that's culturally too. The black community, they keep everything within the family, and that has been generational. But
Mhm.
the shame is keeping them from saving our babies' lives, right? And I hate seeing and reading all these articles about it, and we're not addressing it. So
Yeah.
that's the reason why I asked you to come on, because I know this is your area of interest. But I really think that we need to um, change the lens, demystify the stigma, talk to people like yourself, who work with these populations, and say, when they come in my office, yes, we play games, yes, we establish a rapport, but that's just the foundation to get to the root of the problem. And if you bear with me, we can probably get there together, and then we're working as a team. um
Yeah. It's a fine dance. I had a really tough situation with a client family, African American family. Really difficult. There was no buy-in. I tried everything in terms of rapport building. At one point, the parents both came in and said, this is a waste of time. My child is just doing this for attention.
yes,
And
I've heard that.
yeah, and I turned to the parents and I said, and she can kill herself for attention too. And at one point, I couldn't believe that came out of my mouth, but it did. And and that changed things for that family, right? It
Hmm.
was like a check, like, okay, if you think this child's doing this for attention, let's listen.
Hmm. Let's
Let's
give them
listen.
the attention. Then we can't
Let's give
ignore this.
right, because there are a million and one reasons why someone might self-injure, and I'm going to listen to every reason they tell me. And if one of them's for attention, let's give them the attention and figure it out. And so when parents know that their child's my number one priority,
Hmm.
they see there's more buy-in.
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
hmm,
That's good. I mean, I think that's really good. They have to see that people are there genuinely to help their kid do better. But there's just this whole window of getting them to that point, to a person that genuinely cares, right? And hopefully that's with, like, conversation like this helps to get them to that point, because they don't go. And even with bullying, I've seen, um, in our
mhm,
community with bullying, we always talk about when we grew up, how we dealt with a bully, right? But times have changed. How I dealt with a bully was, we fought, right? And that's what I was taught. Like, you have to fight them. You fight your bullies, and then you make the bully look like they're not a bully anymore, right? Or whatever. But that's not the time that we live in. With the age of technology and all this stuff, bullying has become a major, major thing that takes over people's lives, and the adolescents then begin to feel trapped and hopeless,
Yeah.
right? And it leads to either self-injury or the suicide. So
Right.
we need
Or
to
both.
look at, in our culture, we need to look at bullying differently. Instead of telling them, go and fight, we need to really take serious what they're saying about the bully. Like, we
Yeah.
need to really go to the school and address the issue, or move and change their schools. Whatever we have to do, because it's so serious now. And
Right.
I also think that I read somewhere where we talked about relationships. How I view a relationship and how you view a relationship is very different. And in some
Mhm.
people's view of relationships, their relationships are so intense that if something happens to the relationship, they'll do either try to make an attempt at suicide or self-injure. And
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
as parents, we need to be aware of the intensity level of our child in relationships and what relationships mean to them.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, yeah. And that also links in with like emotional intelligence and emotional maturity and
Mm-hmm.
attachment and trauma. And
Mm-hmm.
so I kids with a trauma background or have attachment issues, then if a relationship goes south, it's a big trigger for acts of self-injury or suicide.
Yeah.
Uh,
But
right. And
how do we address that? We can't make the person get back in a relationship with them, right? So how would how would a parent address that? Like,
well, I think, how would a parent address that? I think, I mean, my bias would be we need to get back to what you said about demystifying counseling, because what's happening there, from my perspective, is that the child's tolerance for emotions is pretty low, and so through therapy, not, the parent needs to recognize that that's not necessarily their job to build their child's tolerance to deal with difficult emotions, but that's where like a professional can come in, right? And so
coping skills, developing more coping skills, right?
I I think, when a child goes through their first breakup or a first significant trauma, that's an intense pain, and kids that don't learn to sit in that pain, it gets dangerous, right? If you don't have the ability to sit in pain, and learn how to cope with that pain, it
Mm-hmm.
can lead to high rates of self-injury and high rates of suicide attempts.
Hmm. And I was just reading these statistics thinking that girls are so, when you look at it, the girls are really who we're talking about. Yes, we do have the males, but the girls are so much at risk. Um,
They Although, some of the most intense self-injuring acts that I've seen have been from boys, young
I heard
boys.
theirs are more intense.
More intense, often took me longer to discover. Not as typical in placement in terms of where they chose to self-injure than as women, but um, and a lot of the research just hasn't been done among men, young boys.
Uh,
Yeah.
Men as well. So the research
Yeah.
is really lacking. So you have a lot of research to do, it sounds like.
I do. I do. Even in like detention centers and prisons, there's high rates of self-injury
Hmm.
in those populations as well. There's growing research in those areas too.
So it's a matter of, basically, it's not there because we just don't know. And it could have been going on in the Black community for so long. And because they're hiding it and no one's talking about it, we just don't know. We just don't have the facts and stuff to draw on. And people aren't talking about it. They're not saying, this happened in my family, unless you make it okay for them to talk about. And then they'll share, no, this happened to my daughter, or this happened to my son too. But we're not talking about it in that manner, which we really need to talk about, so that your story can help the next parent cope with their story, right? And can help them, what worked for yours. I spoke to a parent the other day who wasn't comfortable with, okay, traditional counseling, but she was okay with getting art therapy.
Okay.
So she went to art therapy. But some of the same things happen in art therapy. Art is just a way to establish the rapport sometimes, right?
Oh yeah. Do a lot of art-based work with clients. Yeah.
Right, right, right. But whatever it is to get them that intervention, I think ignoring it, the problem gets worse. It does
Oh,
not go away.
Well, what happens, as I've worked with adolescents, but I've also worked with adults, and the behavior over time can develop into what almost like an addiction. Your body can crave those same sorts of endorphins that are produced through self-injury, and so you develop a dependency on the behavior, which can lead to more extreme forms of self-injury in order to get the same release, which can lead to accidental death by
suicide. Yeah. Yeah, because they were doing it to release pain, and it went to another level.
Tell you what, like when I work with a client who's been self-injuring for 10 years versus a client who's been self-injuring for 10 weeks, the rates of success are far better when I work
Right.
with someone
So
doing it very
basically,
get
we're saying get help early on, right?
get them in because there's I'm always hopeful for whatever client I work with, but in my experiences, those who've been there's a lot of more complications as the longer it sinks in, because you're dealing not only with the psychology of it, now you're dealing with the physiology of it. When your body is dependent on it, you're now fighting a different battle.
Right. Well, I appreciate this discussion. I'm going to open up to anyone that have any questions. I only spoke a little bit about some of the warning signs and things like that, but I want to be able to answer anyone's question. Do you guys have any questions in regards to suicide, self-injury, adolescence, anything that we can answer? Anyone? We had a few comments. I'll read one comment. Nolana said she thinks that in the Black community, risky behaviors come from behaviors from a moral judgment lens, opposed rather than looking at iterations of self-injury. So they look at sexual promiscuity and drug abuse, but they're not looking at cutting as a risky behavior.
Good point.
And it is a risky behavior. It should be on the list as well. Any other questions? If not, I can give just a couple more of the risk factors. So we talked about, and maybe they're typing, but we talked about changes in behavior. But I think also the cry for help. One of the things that I talked about when I did the training in Jamaica, we did some role playing on if someone came to you and said, I want to die today, what would your response be, right? And I think one of the major issues is we don't know how to communicate with the term suicide, right? We don't know how to respond when someone says that. We don't know. We immediately want to respond in a way where we're ignoring the term. They said they want to die, right? And that is very serious. But we don't want to address that term. From a cultural perspective, we don't want to address it. So we'll talk about everything around it. Like, oh, well, what happened today? Or, other things like that. But we'll never address the seriousness. That was a cry for help. They told you specifically they wanted to die today. And if they leave your arms right now, they can actually die by suicide. And you didn't address what they stated, right? So I'm going to pose that to you. If someone came and said, I want to die today, there's nothing for me to live for, I would be better off dead, what would your response be?
Well, I think the first thing was to try to respond with my whole self with a lot of compassion. Right. Right. Because when someone shares something so personal and so sensitive, and you can respond with judgment, without judgment and with compassion, it can go a long way. I'd want to know more about what that client means, right? Like, if a client that's thought about like a plan for
yes,
a means to a plan, if they had past attempts, all those things raise the ante, like in terms of risk assessment. Or is this something that they are just thinking about in their head, and that they really have hope, but they don't want to die? You know, you need to figure out like how imminent the risk is. You also need to take into account how old they are. You also need to take into account, you know, what resources in the community that are available to you to get this client safe.
Yes.
But you take what, you know, when a client says that, whether or not you think it's going to happen or not, you take it with 100% truthfulness.
Yes.
Imagine if you shared that, you carried that with you.
Right.
Shared it and someone did not take it seriously. Right. And so I, no matter what, take that seriously. I often have to break confidentiality, get that client in a safe space, a safe place where they can be monitored. Unfortunately, the system is not perfect, so they get monitored for 24, 48 hours and then they're sent home. Yeah. Where our role comes in terms of education and parents and keeping the children safe, removing guns, weapons, and putting them in locked drawers, things like that when the child comes home.
Right. I see Kathleen is on here. You know, she is the guru of play therapy. But I don't know. I don't see her. But I know she's watching. I wish she was on here because I know she probably has some insight with play therapy and how she would use that to kind of demystify the counseling aspect and establish rapport and stuff. But yes, I can't get her. I don't even see her. Kathleen, come all the way on. She just kind of liked what we were saying. We need you to come. You need to join us, Kathleen.
A whole separate one on play therapy.
Yeah, we definitely could. We definitely could. Well, she's moving now. You know, I can't bother her right now.
That's true.
But I thank you for giving us that information. I think that the response to a person who is crying for help, we have to take it serious and not a joke. And I think in some cultures it would be a joke, like, you know, just jump or something like that, you know. And I've heard that. And so, but we have to take it very, very seriously and say, it sounds like you're in a whole lot of pain. And I'm so sorry that you're in this pain, but let's talk about it. Because they opened the door. You just have to walk through the door.
Exactly.
And that's kind of what they're looking for.
Exactly. We said, yeah.
Well, thank you. I know you're busy. Today was therapy day for you. But I appreciate you so much.
Well, I appreciate you. And anytime you want to do this again, you just let me know.
All right. Thank you. And thank you, everyone that joined us. If you do have questions later, I'm sure we can answer them if you message me or whatever. But I do appreciate you all joining us. It's Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, and we are trying to demystify mental health, period. We want to remove the stigma. And so that was the reason for our talk today. And I'll see you next week when we talk about adult mental health and from an HR perspective, and how to work with their benefits at your employer. Thank you, Dr. Craigen.
Thank you. Take care, guys.
Okay. Bye-bye.